So welcome friends, my name is Ishant and we will be discussing some interview questions which are quite crucial and important with respect to Java. So guys, once again, this is Ishant on behalf of Edureka. It's been a long time that I have been associated with Edureka now. So I'm an ex-employee of Samsung R&D. So more or less into startups as well. And it's been more than 10 years for me that I am into the Java. So I am a technocrat more or less. So love to explore Java. Android and I somehow we are very well connected. So I'm also an alumni with Bits Pilani. So worked across various nations as well. So South Korea, US, Canada, etc., etc. So this was a little bit about me. Let's understand the market of Java first of all, right? So we're gonna first of all understand that how Java is useful, and thereafter we'll see some various topics where we will be understanding some interview questions. So Java has been rated #1 in TOB Popular Programming Languages Index. So even if you browse on the various job indexing sites, right, so you'll be able to see that Java has been rated as #1 programming language. So it's used by 10 million developers and over 15 billion of devices. They are powered by Java, and Java is nowadays very popular language, especially in terms of when you come up with the mobile application development with Android, right? And big data Hadoop again. So any DTH boxes again, Java is there. So Java is used almost everywhere now, and having a fair information over the Java is always a better thing. If we compare the Java job trends, we can see the postings in India versus postings in US. So approximately 50,000 job postings as of 15th March 2017 in India, and approximately more than 70,000 in United States, right? So that's like the average Java job data which we can put up. It's now from the various different portals, guys, right? So Naukri and Indeed and LinkedIn, if you can see, right? So depends now, but we have taken up the maximum from the Indeed, right? So quite few good job postings available. Now if we talk about the distribution and the salary trends, again Java outshines, right? And 62% of the Java development jobs are available in the market, right? We got various different roles in which the people can fit in. We got engineers, architects, programmers, leads, analysts, and consultants, right? And we got one or two $246 per year as in the average salary for a Java developer, right? If you can see, there are various statistics available for the salaries. Again, guys, this data has been mined, and it is as of 15 Jan 2017. So what we are up to, we will be understanding some basic Java questions, right? So what and all are the questions which are fired in the interview rounds, right? Other than that, we'll be taking on to the topics one by one. So we'll take on to OOPS, that's like object-oriented programming structure, and this is the core of your Java. Then we got servlets. So they are the basic components when you are going to write your web applications. Then you got Java database connectivity, where we'll be understanding and we'll be introducing to few of the concepts in the market with respect to the database connectivity. Then Spring, as in the framework of frameworks, right? So we'll be discussing what is Spring, and emphasis will be on the MVC part, that's like model view controller. And lastly, we'll be discussing the Hibernate. So Hibernate's gonna be the backend framework, right? How you can opt for Hibernate instead of JDBC. We'll just see some comparisons and see various interview questions coming into that part. So let's just start with something known as the basic questions which are asked to the candidates in the entry process. So the very first is the difference between three terms, that's like JDK, JRE, and JVM. So as a Java developer, you must have a fair knowledge what exactly are these three terms, right? So guys, let us understand now. So Java virtual machine is basically an abstract machine. It's a software which is already provided by the platform. So it provides the runtime environment. Whenever you are writing the Java source code, it gets compiled into the bytecode. So JVM is that layer which is going to execute your bytecode now. Other than that, you got JRE, which is the runtime environment. Now it's basically where JVM is gonna use the JRE So JRE is set of libraries required by the JVM in order to execute your code. JDK is one development kit required by the Java developer. So it consists of various APIs for you through which you can write your code. So just for an instance, right? So JDK will contain your various packages coming into, for example, java.io, java.utils, all these APIs, the set of library, the information that comes from your Java development kit. Other than that, it has various tools also available. For example, Java and Java C, right? So Java C is a tool which is used for compilation, whereas Java is for the execution of your bytecode. So these tools are also part of JDK. So let's switch on to the next question. What is synchronization? This is one of the hot favorite questions. Whenever you talk of threads, so we do have this term known as synchronization. So synchronization is something where multiple threads, if they're gonna access the same object, right? So there is only one resource which multiple threads they want to access. You need to come up with something known as synchronization. So guys, what is synchronizations? Here we'll take up one example. Let's say we want to book a movie ticket and it's gonna be one seat which has to be booked by multiple people, right? So let's say one corner seat in the last row has to be booked by multiple people. So multiple people over the web will treat them as multiple threads. They are looking on to a single object on a single resource, that's like the last row, last seat, right? So whosoever will first of all try to block that seat will be given an access, and no other person can thereafter block that seat. So synchronization is very much in line to this concept. When you got multiple threads which are going to work over a single object, you need to use a keyword known as synchronized, with the help of which you will be able to acquire the locks on your objects. So synchronization is a process which gonna keep all the concurrent threads in the execution to be in a synchronous mode, one after the other. The lock acquisition is gonna come up into action. Synchronization will avoid the memory consistency errors due to any inconsistent view of the shared memory. Let us understand the difference between processes and threads now. So synchronized word came up and we started off something known as thread. So let us understand what exactly is process and what is a thread now. So guys, in order to come up with process and thread, let's just have one visual coming in. Let us say you got this layer as an operating system, right? So we'll say that this is one operating system. It can be any OS now, right? It can be Windows, Mac, Linux, any of the flavor. So when you're gonna run the program, what OS will do? OS will create a process, right? So this process will be created by the operating system whenever you are supposed to execute your application. So other than that, what it does is it will also give you some storage space where RAM will come into action, right? So further, the RAM can have various data structures coming into it. For example, you can have the data being stored in the form of stack or the heap, right? So that's like the storage concept. Let us say I got one program which I need to execute. So whenever I'm going to execute my program, so the running instance of your program over the operating system is nothing but it's a process. Within the process, we have one guy known as main thread. So main thread is what? This is the guy which will execute some instructions, or you can say some sequential tasks which you mention in your main method, right? So whatever the statements you are writing in your main method, they are nothing, they are these tasks which are executed one after the other via main thread within the process. So guys, a process is running instance of your program over the operating system, and a thread like a main thread is running within the process. So we must understand threads are available within the processes, and processes are running on top of operating system. There might be a scenario that a particular task, like I'm just going to highlight this task over here. So this might take a longer time, right? So let us say this particular task will take a minute or so because it's gonna fetch the data from the server now. So in this context, right, so these three tasks, they will be blocked, right? So when I am talking about these three tasks, the yellow states, so they're gonna get blocked now. So what we can do, we can bring down one more thread, and we'll say that this is one user thread or child thread. So we got various other terminologies for this guy, right? And we'll offload the heavier task over here of the main thread to the user thread. In this way, what we are able to do is we are able to outsource the heavier task to some other thread, and we will be coming up with the concept of concurrent programming. That is what we want to achieve now, right? So let us understand what has happened over here, guys. So let's see this part now. So process and thread, they are two different concepts, but we must understand now any executing instance of a program on top of your operating system is nothing but it's a process. So on operating system, we got multi-processing, whereas thread is something which is a subset of the process now. So within a process, you got multiple threads. So multiple processes on OS level, multiple threading on process level. When you talk about the communication, so one process, when it wants to interact with the other process, we call the processes as inter-process communication, where threads within a process, they can directly interact with each other. When we talk of the control statement, so processes can only exercise control over the child processes, whereas threads can exercise considerable control over the threads of the same process. Any change in the parent process will not affect the child process, whereas if there is something where the main thread is getting affected, the other user threads or the child threads, they might get affected. If you talk of the memory structure, so processes, they run in the separate memory space. Each and every process will have its own memory space, whereas threads, they want to share the same memory space which is being allocated to the process by the operating system. So guys, once again, process is controlled by OS, whereas threads are controlled by the programmer in a program, right? Or you can say by the process itself. If you talk of the dependency level, processes are independent, where threads, they're gonna get dependent, because if you can notice this image right over here, so we created this user thread and there is a dependency that this task has been outsourced to this user thread by the main thread. So dependency of the main thread over the user thread relies, and vice versa, right? So it can be based on our logics even. So let us move to the next concept now. So the next fundamental is, what exactly is a wrapper class? Now this is also one of the hot favorite question which is always asked. What is wrapper class? What is meant by the term boxing or the auto boxing? So let us see this part, guys. So wrapper classes, they are the way where we can convert the Java primitives into the reference types, that's like the objects. So each and every primitive type has a wrapper class defined, and it's in by default they are available in java.lang package. You need not to import any package. So for boolean we got boolean, right? For char we got character, and for int we got integer, for double, so on and so forth, guys. So wrapper classes are the means by which you are able to convert your primitives into the references. So let us understand what exactly is this conversion of primitives into references. Let us say I got this I as 10. So we call this guy as a single value container, because I can contain only one value. It's not an object now, it's a primitive type. You want to convert this primitive guy into an object, you say integer iref assign new of integer, and you mention this guy I as a part of constructor. So what we have done, we have boxed. So it's like constructing the object now, constructing the object. So that's what we have done, guys, over here, right? So this particular statement over here is known as boxing. On the other way around, when you say in jassign iref dot int value, so this concept is known as unboxing, right? Extracting the value from object. So you must understand this concept over here, boxing versus unboxing, which is achieved with the help of wrapper classes. Other than that, you can also say integer kref assign I. So this is known as auto boxing, right? So this instruction is translated internally by the compiler as in integer kref assign new of integer, where we got this guy known as I, right? So this is auto translation. You need not to write the whole statement. So you just mention the partial statement or the implicit statement, we call it as auto boxing. And if you write down, let's say L assign kref, right? So this is known as auto unboxing. So important question again, what is boxing versus unboxing, and thereafter what is auto boxing versus auto unboxing. So the major reason why we do boxing or unboxing is to convert primitives into the objects. Now if you're talking about object oriented programming structure, right, so we are always thinking of objects now. So if you are able to convert primitives into the objects, it means that you are strictly and truly following object oriented programming structure. So we got one way of doing it, and now you can also pass by reference the primitives. So that's one more way of coming up, like why you do a boxing part. So we can pass the variables by references now, right? Because here you are getting the references to the objects. All right, so let's come back now to the next question, number 5. That's like, what are the keywords final, finally, and finalize, and what is exactly the purpose of it? So they are now the 3 different keywords, right? So even the final term is something which means the last thing, but they have different meanings in different contexts now. Now final is a kind of a constant. So if you mark a variable as final, you can't change its value. So here if you can see a very small snippet, right? So a is 1000 and you try to change its value, the compiler will not allow you to do so. So final is a keyword where you are able to mark your variables as constant. You can also mark your classes to be final. In that context, you cannot inherit from that class. You can also mark the methods to be final. In this regard, your methods, they will not be overridden. So final can be used with 3 of the concepts: final as a variable, final as a class, and final as a method. Finally is the other context where we use it with the exception handling techniques now. So what exactly is the place where we will be coming up with finally? So many a times when you are writing the exception handling code with a try and a catch clause, there might be a scenario whenever the exception will come, the statements mentioned within the try block, they will not be executed below the statement where the exception will come, right? So let's say there are 10 instructions in the try, and on the 5th instruction in the try you get an exception. So below 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 instructions, they will not be executed. You need finally block to mention such instructions which must be executed either exception comes or it does not. So finally is that piece of block which will be executed whether the exception is coming or it is not coming. For example, if you want to close the database connections, now exception is there or not, but we would like to close the connection at any cost, right? So you mention all such statements in your finally block. So the next part is finalize. So guys, finalize is a kind of a destructor. So whenever the object will be removed from the memory by the garbage collector, so this finalize method will be executed. So you can explicitly try out this example where you can say system.gc, right? And you need to just mention your references to be pointing to the null, and thereafter your finalize will be executed. So you can just have a small example on this, right? So what I can do, I can just demonstrate this. So let's say we got this class known as finalize demo, right? And I'm just gonna make this method finalize over here. So I'll say CISO object finalized, right? So here we go. Now what I'll do, I'll create the object of finalized demo. So I'll say finalized demo, fd reference assign new of finalize demo. So here we created an instance, and thereafter I'll say fd ref to go as null. It means it is not pointing to anything now. So later I'll say system.gc. So GC is called to the garbage collector, and it's gonna destroy the objects which are no longer required. So now you can see over here. So let me run it as a Java application. It says object finalized. Why is it coming? Because it's acting as a destructor call. So anything which you want to do before your object is removed from the memory, right, you can write it into the finalize method. All right. So let's go to the next concept. It's a difference between string buffer and string builder, right? So before we jump on the string buffer and string builder, we must understand they are both similar concepts when they are compared with the string class. So string is immutable version, whereas string buffer and string builder, they are the mutable versions, right? So let me define this part, what is meant by mutability versus immutability. Consider you got this string str1, which is a new string having hello, and you got this one more guy known as string builder. You say builder assign new string builder, and you mention hello. Similarly, you say string buffer. Let's take this guy as a buffer. You say buffer assign new of string buffer, again hello. So I have taken up these three strings, let us say str, builder and buffer. And now what is next? I will be appending the data in these strings now. So you say str.concat. So in string you need to say the function as concat. So I'll say hi, and similarly let us concatenate into the buffer and the builder. So I'll say builder dot append. So in the builder, the function which we use is append, and same goes with the buffer. So buffer and builder, they are quite similar now. Later when I'll do a CISO on str, and similarly the builder and the buffer part, let us say builder and then finally the buffer. So the buffer here, we run the code. You see one major difference over here is that you get hello. So nothing happens when you concat the data into the str, right? But in case of builder and buffer, the data is concatenated. This is why, because strings are immutable, whereas buffers and builders, they are mutable. This is also one of the very beautiful query, first of all. So guys, buffer and builder, they are the mutable sequences, whereas string, it is immutable. You cannot change it, even though you are going to perform an operation. So what is happening over here, whenever you concatenate the data, you will be getting a new string, right? So you need to store the data into a new string. So concatenation results the data coming out as a new string. The old string is not changed. So significant difference between buffer and builder now we'll be discussing. String buffer operations are thread safe. So it means that by default, when you are going to use buffer, it will be synchronized. You need not to worry on top of multiple or concurrent threading now. Whereas builder, it's not thread safe. String buffer is to be used when multiple threads, they are going to work on the same string, whereas builder is supposed to be in a single threaded environment. Other than that, builder is quite better as compared to buffer over the performance part, because there is no synchronization overhead. So you can just try to write out this snippet over here, which will be able to help you to come up with the timing difference, and you will be able to see that builder will outshine the buffer in terms of performance. All right, so let us understand the difference between heap and stack. So stack and heap, they are two memories which are very much famous when you talk about the Java runtime, right? So Java runtime, the RAM, we got these two major data structures, stack and heap. So first of all, let us see how this stack and heap will come into action, right? So let us take one example, guys. So I'll just remove these snippets. All right, so let us understand the stack and heap into action. When we are talking about the RAM allocation, so this RAM will be divided into two parts. The first part is the stack and the other part will be the heap. So this circle is representing the heap memory. So both of them are a part of RAM now, right? So both the data structure, they are part of RAM. We got stack and heap. So let us understand this point of stack and heap, how the data will be stored and where it will be stored. I'll just take up one basic example from the Eclipse now. Whenever you will be creating an object, so for example, finalize demo, I said fd-ref assign new finalize demo. This is known as object construction statement, right? So this is object construction statement. So here what we are doing, we are trying to create an object with the help of new operator. And to be very much more precise, I'll take one class like point, right? And we'll define some x and y as attributes within this class point, right? And I can have one function like show point, which can just display me the data of point. So I can say point is plus the value of x, let us say a hyphen plus y, right? So that's like a point now. So how I'll be creating the object of point now? Same way you created the finalized demo, you say point p1 reference assign new of point. So how this statement will be represented in the memory? So guys, for this statement to be represented in the memory, what will be going into the stack, what will be going into the heap? Let's have a close look onto that part now. P1 ref over here will reside into the stack like this, right? So this guy is P1 ref. It will be created on some memory location. So let us assume it's 4001. It will be a hexadecimal address, but I'm just assuming it to be one address over here as 4001. So this memory location, this container P1 ref is created out over here. What is next? The next part is an object which will be constructed in the heap, which will have two compartments. The first compartment is your attributes, that's like x and y, and the second compartment goes like the methods show point. So this is like the attributes, and the second compartment is for your methods. Now what is happening over here? So this object has no name now, right? So this is having no name. On the heap you don't have any name for this guy, but you can definitely have an address over the memory. Let's say this is 6001. So this object is constructed at 6001. So P1 ref will have the address of your object, and this guy P1 ref is doing nothing, but it is pointing to this guy 6001. So we say P1 ref as a reference variable because it is referring to the object available at 6001. It's not a kind of a pointer now, right? In order to prove this concept, we can just say sysout of P1 ref. When I will do a sysout of P1 ref, let's say P1 ref is plus the value of P1 ref. Now I'm gonna run the code. You will understand that P1 ref over here is showing me some address of an object of type point, right? Since we got in the package code.edureka, so it says that code.edureka.point at memory location. So this is the memory location 7852E922, which P1 ref is holding for your object. So now once we are good to go, what is available in stack, what is available in heap for this instruction, right? So guys, anything for which you use the new operator, that will be constructed in the heap. So heap is that memory location where we use the new operator, and new operator is used to create the things dynamically. When I use the word dynamically, it means at runtime. It means anything which is constructed dynamically at runtime in your program, it will reside in the heap, right? So that's what the new operator will help us to do. Now let us have some more differences between stack and heap. So guys, stack memory is used only by one thread of execution, whereas heap memory is used by all parts of the application. If you talk on the access level, objects stored in the heap are globally accessible, whereas stack memory cannot be accessed by the other threads. Memory is like LIFO, whereas the heap memory is basically the tree structure now, right? So the memory management is based on the generation associated to each object. So here what we try to store the data is in the form of key value pair. So each and every object will have a hash code now. So that acts as a key for your object. When you talk of the lifetime, so we got existence until the end of execution of the thread, whereas heap memory will live from the start till the end of the application execution, and your garbage collector can anytime free this memory space. If you talk of the usage now, when an object is created over the stack, so now please guys, in case of Java, every object is dynamically constructed, so there is nothing like objects being constructed in the stack, right? So we are just giving a general overview of heap and stack over here, not typically inline to your Java. These are the general differences. Now in Java, your each and every object will be constructed dynamically in the heap space, not in the stack space. So in the stack space, you will be getting the references to the objects now, right? So guys, whenever an object is created, it is always stored in the heap space, and stack memory only contains the local reference variables which are pointing to the objects in the heap. So let us move towards the next basic question, that's like the difference between the array list and a vector. So these are the two data structures. These are the two collection APIs in the java.util package. So both of them are quite same. The very major difference is that array list is not synchronized, whereas vector is synchronized. So guys, when your data structure is not synchronized, so the performance will be a bit more better as compared to the other one. So that's why your array list will behave faster in terms of performance as compared to your vector. If an element is inserted into the array list, it increases the size by 50%, whereas vector, they don't do it so, but they just double the size of its array, right? And array list does not define the increment size, whereas in the vectors you can define how much size the vector should increment when it has reached its limit. Other than that, array list can only use iterator for traversing, whereas in vector, right, except hash table, vector is the only other class which can use enumerations as well. So you can enumerate over the vector. With the help of enumerations, we can also iterate within the vector. So that's like some of the differences which are highlighted over here. Similarly, the other collections, hash map and hash table. So this is again a relevant question which is asked in the interviews many a times as a basic question. So hash map and hash table, again, the first difference is the synchronization, right? And your hash tables, they are synchronized, whereas hash maps, they are not synchronized. Hash map allows a null key and a null value, whereas hash table will throw a null pointer exception if you will try to add a null key or a null value. Other than that, since a hash map is not synchronized, it's gonna behave faster as compared to the table. And we can make the hash map as synchronized by calling the collection synchronized map API. So it's not like that we cannot mark the hash map as synchronized. We can come up with our own logics as well, right? So guys, hash map traverse can be done through iterator, whereas table can be enumerations as well as iterator. Hash map will inherit abstract map class, whereas hash table is totally working on the dictionary class. Now the next concept is the difference between equals and equal to operator. Now this is one, as a new Java developer, many times we'll do this big mistake by comparing the strings with the equal to operator. So unlike your other languages, here you need to use the equals method to compare the strings now, right? So guys, let us understand this concept first of all. I'll just try to demonstrate it by writing one example. So let us say you got one string str1 as new string. So just recently we had this discussion that this is an object construction instruction. So str1 is a reference variable, whereas the string object will be constructed in the heap. So str1 is having one address, right? So let me write down this thing. str1 is a reference variable. It is having the address of an object. Similarly, I'll create one more str2, right? So str2 is also a reference variable. It is having the address of some other object. The difference over here, which we need to understand, is that there are two different objects which are containing the same value hello, right? So objects are containing the same value hello, and str1 and str2, they are the two different references and having the different values. So that's why if you're gonna compare it using equal to operator, right, so it's gonna say str1. Let me just finish out the program, and in the else part I'll just say not of equal to. Right now you will observe that str1 is not equal to str2. The reason is very similar because you are comparing references now. So double equal to, we are comparing references, right? So that's one important difference for us to understand. Now when you need to compare the objects, you don't use double equal to. Instead you use this method known as dot equals, right? So you say let us compare the strings using equals method. So here I'll say equals and not equals. So we don't compare strings using the equal to operator. That's very risky. It's one big mistake. You compare the strings with the equals method. Equals method is not comparing the references. It is comparing the values within the objects, right? So that's what we are able to understand, comparison of references versus comparison of values. So you can take up this program, guys, over here. If you can see, right, just go ahead and try to run this execution. We got one more program over here. Let us predict the output for this program. So in the main method, you are calling the method 1 with the input as 11. So you pass this 11 over here. From here you are invoking the method 2 by passing 11 into 11, and in the method 2 you are passing method 3, which is division of 11, and then in the method 3 you are subtracting 11, and finally in the method 4 you are adding of 11. So guys, finally you will be getting the result as 11 itself, right? Because 11 into 11, it's gonna be 121, divide by 11, it's gonna be 11, minus 11, it's gonna be 0, plus 11, it's again gonna be 11. So try out this program, right, and see to it if you can get the same output or not. So these are some of the basic questions, right, highlighted by us, which are very important and crucial from the interview perspective. Next we'll be jumping on to the object-oriented programming structure. Now this is one key area which company or an interviewer is looking and expecting. As a developer, you should be quite good on these concepts, because the advanced concepts or any of the application development model, it relies heavily on object-oriented programming structure. So let us see what we can have in the object-oriented programming structure. So the very first question, as in question number 12, is the difference between abstract classes and interfaces. So let us see some of the differences. Again, guys, this is quite theoretical information, right? But I would like to take one very small demonstration on abstract class versus interface. because it is very important to have a very fair knowledge, and this concept is linked with your runtime polymorphism. So let us understand this concept. So I'm going to create one class shape, and we'll have this method known as a draw, right? So let's have a draw method, and you say CSO drawing a shape. Now this is something which even we teach in the traditional language like C, C++, I mean native languages. So this is the same concept carried forward. We got a shape class and we got a draw method. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna create the object of shape s assign, or let us say shape s, and then say s assign new of shape, and then you can say s dot draw. So the output is very much simple. You get the method drawing a shape. But I want my shape to be either as circle, rectangle, or polygon, right? So what I will do, I will just come up with a class known as circle. So I'll say this guy's circle shall extend something known as shape, right? And in a similar way, I'll also try to come up with something known as rectangle. And lastly, I'll say a polygon. So shape has 3 children now, and each and every child will be redefining the draw method with the respective shapes, right? So here we are. Now this is very well understood that whenever you're gonna redefine the method, so the concept of overriding will come into action, right? So this is overriding. And now if you say circle C and C assign new of circle, and you say C dot draw, you will always get drawing a circle because overriding has come into action. What I want to do, I don't want to do this concept, right? It's a basic concept now that whenever you will create the object of child, always the definition of child will come into action as a concept of overriding. What I want to do, I want to say reference variable belongs to the parent and the object belongs to the child. Now this is known as polymorphic statement. So how it is a polymorphic statement now? The guy shape S is pointing to circle. So shape is now behaving as circle. Let us assume that. Now this instruction is equated. It's very well equated. The equation is true. Reason is that circle is also a shape. Circle is a child of shape. So technically their type is same now, right? So I'll say S dot draw. So I'm saying S dot draw. What you're gonna observe is you get drawing a circle now, which is very well true, because there are two definitions. One belongs to the shape, other belongs to the circle. And when you say S dot draw, you will be getting drawing a circle. So you will be giving the preferences to the children over here, and the parents definition, they again gonna get overridden. What I'll do now, I'll say S is now a new of rectangle, right? You say S dot draw, and then you say S is new of polygon, and then you say S dot draw. So every time you are able to achieve S dot draw, drawing the different shapes, right? So this is what we call as in runtime polymorphism. The same method draw over the same reference variable S, we are able to draw different shapes dynamically at runtime. So guys, this beautiful concept is known as runtime polymorphism, right? And what we need to understand from here is that the guy draw in the shape method is useless. Having this concept over here that S is a new shape, so having the object of shape and executing this guy S dot draw makes no sense. It's not a pretty good sense, right? Drawing a shape makes no sense. Shape has to be circle, rectangle, or the polygon. So what we need to understand from here is we need not to have the object for this class, and we need not to have the definition for this guy draw. So you can change the architecture of your program, and you can bring down one more class shape, mark this guy as abstract, and mark the method within your class also as abstract. So an abstract class is a class for which you cannot have objects now. You can't create the objects, right? So here you can see it's an error. Other than that, the method can also be marked as abstract, which means you need not to have definition. So guys, when a class is marked as abstract, you cannot create the objects, but runtime environment will create the object, right? So see, so I say shape is constructed. Very important difference which I'm going to highlight today. So when you say the constructor over here, right, so you are able to create the constructor. It means the objects can be constructed for the shape, but you cannot create it. Runtime environment will be able to create that. You cannot create. If you will try to create it, it's gonna give you an error, right? So the same problem statement is solved, drawing a circle, drawing a rectangle, drawing a polygon, but before the construction of the child object, the parent object is constructed by the runtime environment. So we say this is object to object inheritance, right? So what is happening over here? Inheritance is happening over here from object to object. So the parent object is constructed by the runtime environment, and then the child object is created. So abstract class is a class. You cannot create the objects, but the runtime environment can do so, and it can have abstract methods which have no definition. So no definition for this guy. Who has to define this guy? The child has to mandatorily define the definition for the draw. So if the child is not defining the draw method, it's gonna throw an error. So let's try to see this. So you try to comment out this code, you can see now it is giving you an error. So if there is n number of abstract methods in the abstract class, you need to redefine them in the children. Now we can understand this part, that this shape has helped us to improve the concept of runtime polymorphism. But this is again, which is like a parent is writing some rules which are supposed to be defined by the children. Now there's a relationship known as parent and child relationship. So abstract class shape is, when extended by the circle, it's a parent-child relationship. For example, the parent is just making a rule that breakfast has to take place at 8 a.m. in the morning. Now the children, they need to define this rule, and they can come up with their own definitions. Okay, we'll come up with a breakfast at 8 a.m., but I'll have snacks, I'll have bread and butter or anything, right? So that's like a parent and a child relationship. And from basic shape class, we came to an abstract class shape with some, you can say there were some problems over here, that we didn't want the object to be coming up, and we didn't want the draw method to take place, right? So we achieved a better way of coming up with runtime polymorphism through abstract classes. Now I'll come up with the best way. So I'll say one interface shape with the method as void draw. So guys, this is the best way to achieve runtime polymorphism now. So what I will do, I will not say extend shape, but I will say implement shape. Now this is the difference which we must observe over here. So rather than doing an extension, I am doing an implementation. And in the interfaces, by default, the methods are public abstract. So it is by default like public abstract void draw. And in the interfaces, if you will observe now, so this constructor is significantly an error. It means that neither you nor the runtime environment can create the objects of shape, right? So it's an error, right? So for the interfaces, neither you can create the objects nor runtime environment can create objects. It means this is not object to object inheritance. There is nothing like parent and child relationship over here. What is the problem over here? This is the kind of traffic police, or the police department is imposing the rules on us to wear a seat belt, and now we need to define that rule, right? So traffic police is imposing a rule to follow the traffic lights, and it is up to us that how we define that rule. So it's not a parent and a child relationship kind of a concept. It's not parent object and the child object concept. Right? I hope you got the example and you are able to correlate the fundamental between the interfaces versus the abstract classes. Now, since this method is by default public, so in order to redefine, you need to always have a higher access or the same access, right? So this is how you have achieved one more refined way of runtime polymorphism, right, guys? So what we have understood, let's come back and now summarize the whole concepts. So abstract class and interfaces, they are the two different concepts, but we can accomplish runtime polymorphism with both of them, one being the parent, other one being one implementation, right? So guys, an abstract class can provide complete default code or just the details that have to be overridden, whereas interface, it will not provide any code. So it's just the signature. There cannot be any definitions in the interfaces, whereas abstract classes, they can have the definition. So we can only extend a single abstract class, whereas a class can implement several interfaces. So this is not multiple inheritance, it is multiple implementation, right? Moving ahead now, abstract classes can have even regular methods, whereas interfaces, they cannot have. Now the instance variables in the abstract class, they can exist, but an interface, it cannot have any instance variables. Its variables are by default static variables, right? In abstract classes, you can use public, private, protected, so on and so forth, whereas in interface, by default, the visibility is public or none, right? So it is by default public somehow. If you mention nothing, it is by default public now. So here we can have constructors, here you cannot have constructor. It means that you don't create the objects, but runtime environment will create. Here neither you can create nor the runtime environment can create. Now abstract classes are faster as compared to the interfaces. They are slow because it requires extra indirection to find the corresponding method in the actual class, right? So that's what we got, some of the theoretical differences after the practical implementations. So polymorphism, I hope, is now very well clear, right? So guys, polymorphism means more than one forms, where a mobile phone can serve the purpose of camera, remote, MP3 player, and alarm clock, so on and so forth, right? So polymorphism can be characterized into two parts. One is at the runtime, one is the compile time. So guys, runtime polymorphism is where you are coming up with this parent and a child relationship. Again, we saw this map example: shape, circle, polygon, and rectangle, right? So what happens in the runtime polymorphism, you create a parent class and then you create a child class. Child class must override the method of the parent class, and thereafter you do an upcasting by saying the reference variable of the parent can point to the object of child. And whenever you will execute the method, you will be able to see the method execution happens for your child. So what is the difference between overloading and overriding? So guys, overloading is concept linked with the compile time polymorphism, whereas overriding is linked with the runtime. So in the definition part, method overloading means that the same method name should have different inputs or the different arguments, right? Every time they must be different now. So in method overriding, the signature should exactly be same. So here return type will not make any difference, but here everything should be exactly same. If you talk of the behavior, method overloading is basically adding or extending the method's behavior, whereas overriding is changing the existing behavior of the method now, right? So here we are trying to add the functionality, here we are trying to change the functionality. So compile time polymorphism versus runtime polymorphism, different signature versus same signature. And when you are talking of the inheritance, it may or may not need inheritance in method overloading, whereas overriding is only linked with your inheritance. So this is one significant difference, guys, if you can see, right? So this we have already observed the overriding part, but in the overloading part, if you can see over here, the add method with the two inputs of type integer and two inputs of type double. So this is one significant example, right? So guys, this is like overloading and this is like overriding, right? So you can just, I think this is done wrongly. So overriding is this example, overloading is this example. All right. So if there is any method which is private or static, so can you just try to override such a method? So guys, the answer is no, you cannot do so. So private method will not be inherited, so it makes no sense to override it or to redefine it. Whereas static method, it belongs to the class, so you cannot override a static method, right? So it's basically what we call it as in a class to class overriding, which is known as hiding, right? So here the concept is known as hiding. So if there is a static method in the parent class and if you want to create a method in the child class to override the static method, it should also be static, and that concept will be referred to as hiding now. So what is multiple inheritance and does Java support it? So guys, multiple inheritance is one class extending more than one classes. So this is not supported in Java. So if you can see, there is a diamond problem which comes into action, that if there is a class A, right, and B and C class, they are inheriting the A class, and there is a class D which is getting inherited from B and C. So two copies of A will be coming into the last class. So this kind of problem is not solved in the Java. It needs the virtual concepts to come into action, since there are no virtual keyword or any other pointer support available in Java. So we cannot solve this problem now, right? So Java multiple inheritance is not supported. So one more query now over here, right? What will be the output of this program? So if the parent is having this method foo, which is marked as static, and one method bar, which is a non-static method, and there is a parent-child relationship where we are hiding a method versus overriding a method, and you are executing these method calls, right? So guys, the output will be, so since if you can see over here, so this parent.foo and child.foo, then parent.bar and child.bar, right? So you'll be able to get all these four outcomes. I am foo in super, in child, then in child, and then in child, right? So just try to execute the code and get the behavior. Similarly, we got one more program. So guys, this is where we got multiple constructors and you created the object for the A. So by default constructor will come into action, but this over the reference function call will execute the constructor over here, and this over here will execute the constructor over here. So you will get how are you, then hello, and then the hi, right? So this as a constructor execution will happen over here as a function call. So you'll get the output in the reverse order now. Right, so one more program, guys. What's going to be the output for the program? So it's basically one miscellaneous program where you got a block and a static block. So guys, a block is executed when you create the object of a class, whereas static block is executed when the class is loaded into the memory. So the idea is to define you guys the role for the static block and a normal block. So a block over here, if you can see, is executed when the object is constructed, and static block is executed when the class is loaded into the memory. So just try to run this program and come up with this output, guys. Alright guys, so now let's understand servlets, right? So this is where we're gonna pursue with the enterprise edition concepts of Java. So we have left out the core part of Java and now we are moving into the advanced part of Java. So servlets is also one of the core concepts when we talk of the enterprise edition of Java. So let us understand what exactly is a servlet, right? So that's like, what is a servlet? So servlet is one Java program which is executed over the server. Now that's like one very basic definition to what exactly is a servlet. So what happens now, whenever you're writing an enterprise application, you need to have some code which is executed by the server. So if the client is sending a request via HTTP or the HTTPS, request will come to a server and the server will execute your Java program and it's gonna send back the response to the client. Now the client can specifically be browser or it can be a mobile application or any other kind of a client, guys, right? So Java Servlet is a server-side technology which will extend the capability of web servers by providing support for dynamic response and data persistence. We got Java X.Servlet and Java X.Servlet.HTTP package, which provides the various APIs for writing the servlet program. Now, any servlet program should implement the servlet interface along with the lifecycle methods where you can manage your code snippets. As most web applications, they are accessed using the HTTP protocol. So we got a class known as HTTP servlet and we got a corresponding hierarchy for the same. So over the web, we use two of the major methods. One is the get, one is the post. So what is the difference between get and post? So guys, get and post, we got two major methods how we can send a request from a client to the server. Other than that, we also have various other methods like put, delete, trace, so on and so forth. So these are the two important methods. Get is when you need to have limited amount of data which can be sent, right? Because the data is sent as a part of URL now. So post is when you have a large data and you need to send it across the body. So it automatically comes up that the data is not visible as a part of URL and it is more secure in terms of post request, right? So security is more because the data is not exposed in the URL. Other than that, you cannot bookmark the post, but the gets can be bookmarked. We got idempotent versus non-idempotent. So guys, what is idempotent? When you send a request, you get a response. You again send a request, you again get a response, and you compare the two responses, whether they are equal or not, right? So idempotent. So this guy get is more efficient, right? And it is more used than the post, right? Where now it depends, right? So efficiency is like get is more efficient undoubtedly, but it depends upon a requirement where you need to use what. Okay, so let's say you want to do a sign in. So obviously we need to send the username and the password to the server, and you cannot send it across the URL. Even now you can send it, but you need to encrypt the data before you send it, right? So that's like the differences between get and post. Now, what is meant by the session management, right? So guys, session is one term which means the time interval between the client and the server. So we have techniques to manage the data within the session. So that's like the session management now. So what are the various methods? So number one, we got the user authentication, then the hidden form fields, cookies, URL rewriting, and we got HTTP session API also to manage the session. So session is a conversational state between the client and server, and it can consist of multiple requests and responses between both of them. Now HTTP is a stateless protocol. You cannot manage and maintain the state, so that's why we need to use some fundamentals through which we can come up with this, right? So guys, every session will have a session ID which will be passed between the client and the server during the request and response, and you can use various different techniques. So to name few, we have mentioned them, right? Now we also have two APIs known as servlet context versus servlet config. So what is the difference over here? So servlet context and config is where we need to extract the data which is stored somewhere as in part of your web.xml deployment descriptor. So we will consider that part now. So servlet config is a single object where servlet context is on a global level now, right? So it's like a local parameter associated with a particular servlet, whereas we got a global parameter. So both of them are the key value pairs, right, mentioned within the web.xml file. Whereas servlet config, so you mention the data within the servlet, whereas servlet context is mentioned out of the servlet tag. In the servlet program, you can use the APIs get servlet config and get servlet context, and thereafter on the basis of the key you can retrieve the data. right? So for example, shopping cart of a user is specific to a particular user, so you can use servlet config. Whereas to get the MIME type of a file or any kind of a global level or a variable, you can use the servlet context. Now, what is a possible life cycle of a servlet? Now, this is really important when you talk of servlets, guys, right? So servlets, they got 5 stages when you talk of the life cycle, right? The first of all, the servlet will be loaded, then it's gonna be instantiated, initialized, then a request will be sent to a servlet, and then finally the servlet will be destroyed. So we got init, service, and destroy as the 3 lifecycle callbacks involved when you write the servlet program. So you got 3 of the APIs now: init, service, and destroy. What is request dispatcher? If you want to share the data from one servlet to the other servlet evenly, right? So we got this guy known as request dispatcher, which can forward the request to the other resource. Now this other resource can be possibly a servlet or an HTML file or a JSP file, and we can do so using the 2 different methods. One is the forward method, other one is the include method. So what happens over here is, when you send out the request from the servlet 1 to servlet 2, when you use the forward method, response generated from the servlet 2 will be sent back to the client. In case of the include method, response from the servlet 2 as well as the servlet 1 will be appended and then sent back as a final response to the client. Now we got request dispatcher coming up with the forward and include in these 2 differences. So guys, one of the important concept associated with the servlet session management is cookies, right? So what exactly a cookie is? So cookies are the textual data which gets stored on the client machine, and this data is sent from the server. So data is stored in the local machine of the client, guys. Let us see this part, right? So if you can see over here, I'll show you this thing. So when you open down the settings of your browsers, right, and you try to say cookie, right? So if you can see over here, so you get these options of cookie coming up over here. Content setting, you can see cookies. So allow the local data to be set, which is evenly recommended. So guys, cookies are the textual data which gets stored on your machine, and you from the server can just use the method known as get cookies, right, to read out all the cookies, and you can create a cookie by using the API cookie itself. It's a hash map key value pair. Cookie C1 assign new cookie with the key and the value, right? And if you want to add the cookie to the client's machine, you just call the method add cookie over the response object. So the next part is the Java database connectivity. So guys, this deals with the database connections now, right? So Java database connectivity, we got the first thing as JDBC driver. So whenever you want to create a connection, you must have a driver, right? So guys, driver is the layer which will help us to interact our JDBC APIs with the database. So there are 4 major types of drivers. We call them type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4 driver. It goes like JDBC, ODBC bridge driver, native API driver, which is a partial Java driver. Then if you want to come up with a client server model, you got network protocol driver. And lastly, you got the pure kind of a driver, thin driver, the fully Java driver, which we'll be using to interact directly with the database. So Java app, it's gonna use the JDBC API, and the JDBC driver manager will interact with the driver, and drivers will further interact with the drivers for the databases libraries, and so, and hence this whole channel of communication will be established. So what are the various steps to connect to the database in Java? We use JDBC, and there are some sequential steps which you need to perform so that we can perform all the CRUD operations. So what are these now? So there are 5 sequential steps which you need to perform. So guys, any of the database whichever you are using, right, so you need to come up with the documentation over their website, right? What is their driver class name, what is the URL, so on and so forth. Anyways, let us have a look on to the snippet now. So the first one is registering the driver, which comes through the API known as class.forName. So here you manage to write the driver, type 4 driver or any other driver which you are going to use. Then you need to create the connection, which is created with the help of an API known as driver manager. So you say driver manager dot get connection. We need to pass three things over here. The first thing is the URL where your database resides. So if it is on the local host, you mention the host name to be the local host and you manage to write the port number and the database name. Then the username and the password for your database. Thereafter, you need to say create statement over the connection. Once you have created the statement, thereafter you will be able to execute any of your SQL query. But in the finally block, you must close your connections. Right, so this is important that you manage to close your connections regardless or whether exception is coming or not coming. So what are the different JDBC API components? So guys, we got various interfaces and classes coming into the Java JDBC package. So we got java.sql package and many of the libraries, if you can see, the APIs are mentioned over here. So in the interface part, we got connection, statement, prepared statement, result set metadata, database metadata, and callable statement. So all these are the interfaces. So connection is used to have a connection, statement to execute the SQL statements, prepared statement is also used to execute the SQL statements, but prepared statement is different from the statement in terms of how you are going to substitute the data into the SQL statement. So here we use something known as wildcard characters as question mark, right? Result set is the retrieved data from the database, and the data about the retrieved data is known as result set metadata, and the data about the database is known as database metadata. Callable statements are used so that you can execute the stored procedures of your databases. And some of the few classes which are mentioned in the right hand side, it includes driver manager, which is used to get the connection. So blob and clob are the two APIs where you can manage the binary large objects and the character large objects. So binary large object means the audio files, the video files, right? Whereas clob means the textual files. Then the type will define what are the various types. SQL exception is exception in the JDBC. If there is any connectivity issue or any other syntactical issue or any different kind of SQL issues which gonna occur at runtime, so SQL exception is the class to get the error from. Now, what exactly a JDBC connection interface be, right? So guys, the connection interface is the one which will maintain a session with the database. So here we can use the transaction management logic, which means atomicity. So atomicity means that all and everything should happen at once. So let us understand. So connection is one important interface with the help of which we can manage the transaction. For the transactions, let us assume I want to transfer the amount from one account to the other account. So there needs to be two possible SQL statements which are supposed to be fired. One will be the updation in my account, that will be deduction of the payment. In the other account, again an updation query which will be the addition of the payment. So these two queries should be fired at once, and if any one query fails, the other query should be rolled back. So for the transaction management via the connection, you create the statement, and thereafter you can come up with the auto commit API where you can mark it as true, and then you can use the APIs like commit and rollback to manage your transactions. So close is a method where you are able to close the session with the database, right guys? So there is one more possible difference between three of the APIs, that's like execute, execute query, and execute update. So guys, execute query, execute update, and execute, these are the three different APIs. All the three APIs are used to perform the SQL operations over the database, but query method is always focused to do a retrieve operation. If you can see now, select operation, right? So whereas your execute update method, it's gonna perform the DML and the DDL operations, insert, update, delete, create and alter of the table, right? Whereas execute method, it is able to perform any kind of operation now. So this is typically used to retrieve the data. Here the data can be modified, whereas execute method, any kind of SQL statement. Return type of these methods, they are different now. So result set will be returned from the execute query method. Here we will be getting some integer output, and here we'll be getting some boolean output. This method is used to execute only select queries, so non-select queries, and here both the select and non-select queries. Right, guys? So that's like the JDBC part, right? So how we got various APIs available in the Java database connectivity, but we need to come up and understand there are the 5 different steps. So you start from loading the driver, then creating a connection, writing the statements, executing the statements, and finally moving on to the closing of the statements. So the next part is the framework of frameworks. That's like the Spring framework. So if you know this, if you have a hold on your Spring framework, guys, so it's like you are done with almost everything now, right? So one of the most important framework in the enterprise edition of Java. Let us see what is Spring framework. So what exactly is Spring, guys? So Spring is an application framework which focuses on a concept known as inversion of control for the Java platform. So many of the great technologies, they are built looking on to the architectural model of the Spring framework. Even the Android, how the UI part is linked with the layout part, so that concept is again adopted from the Spring pattern, right? So it is one of the pattern which focuses on IOC, that's like inversion of control. So the framework's core features, they can be used by any Java app for building an enterprise edition application. One of the major advantage of writing a Spring framework app is it's lightweight. It is having an integrated framework architecture where we can use it to develop any kind of an enterprise app in Java, right? So it's less on a memory, it's high on performance, and it contains various frameworks available within it through which you can write a multi-purpose enterprise application. So guys, what and all are the modules available in the Spring framework now? So Spring framework has various modules. To start with, we got the very first layer as the core container. If you can see this core layer. So whole of your Spring framework is dependent on this core layer. So this core layer focuses on something known as inversion of control and dependency injection. So we got this as Spring context dependency injection. Then AOP is aspect oriented programming, which focuses on how we can fulfill cross-cutting concerns. Then the database module of the Spring framework includes DAO, JDBC, and ORM, as in the design patterns. So DAO, the data access object. So here we can write the DAO patterns to access the database. We got JDBC support. We also got the Hibernate or the ORM support, which is object relational mapping. The web module of the Spring framework can help us to write the web applications, where Spring MVC is one of the majorly used frameworks in the market now. So model view controller, where model represents the data container, view represents the UI or the presentation, and controller represents the business logic, as in servlets now, right? So Spring MVC is one of the very important concern when it comes to develop the web applications, and we got various web services coming out in this module itself. Let us move on to some annotations which are used in the Spring configuration. So guys, there are various annotations now which are used in the Spring framework now. @required, right? So it's like what is the input which is required. Auto wiring for your dependency injection. What happens pre-destroy, what happens post-construct, right? So before the object is finalized, just after the object is constructed, what is the resource, what is the qualifier. So these are some of the Spring annotations which are used for the configuration purpose. So what is bean in Spring and what can be the different scopes of the bean in the Spring? right? So guys, I'll take up one very a basic example over here to mention this concept, right? So let us take one example. So I got this Spring demo available with me with all the jar files available out here. We got this employee bean.xml file. So just give me a moment, right? So all right, so here you can see now we got this employee bean. So this is one XML configuration for the Spring framework. So we got core.edureka.employee as a class, right? And here what I am able to do is to define the property value tags for my bean, right? In the employee.java, I can say it's basically a bean or a pojo. So what is a bean class? Bean class is a class which will have the attributes along with the setter and the getters, right? So all the setter getter methods are also there. In my client class, what I am going to do, I'm just gonna use this Spring container, and thereafter I will just extract my employee object, right? So just let me do this part. All right. So I got the reference of the employee bean.xml, and in my class I got this emp bean1. So I'll just say emp bean1, and thereafter I'll do a CISO of emp, right? So let's try to run the code, and you can see that the data over here is coming up as in ID, name, and salary, right? I have just overridden this toString method out here. So along with this, I'm also supposed to do a super.toString, right? I'll do a \n and a super.toString. So now it will show me the data within the object as well as the reference variable m is pointing to the address. It is showing me the address as well to the object now. So the bean is extracted from the Spring container, right? So there are various scopes available now. For example, same m bean1 in my client, if I try to get it again, right? So let us try to say get of bean again, right, as in emp1 and emp2. Let us say this is emp2 and this is emp1, right? So I will closely observe one difference, I mean one similarity, that every time when you request this guy get bean for the emp bean1, you are able to receive the reference to the same object. Scopes of the bean can be mentioned over here using attribute known as scope, and here now I am going to mention it as prototype. You can see we got this guy as a prototype. Now when I run my code again, you will find one significant difference, that here the reference is coming out to be different. It means now by default it was giving me the singleton as a design pattern, but when I change the scope to prototype, every time I am requesting the object of emp bean1 from the Spring container, it is now constructing a new object and returning it back to me. So guys, this is what we got as in what can be the scope of your bean in the Spring. So inversion of control container can have various scopes now. Singleton means only single object, which is by default. So prototype means you can have every time a new object. Request means one object per entire request. Session means one object per entire session, and global session means one object per entire global session on an application level. So how is a bean added to a Spring application? So guys, you use this tag known as bean, you mention the ID, and then you can have the properties as in key value pair, right? So what is the role of dispatcher servlet and context loader listener? So guys, dispatcher servlet is acting as a front controller in the Spring MVC. So many times I will call it as a receptionist now. So what happens, any request when it's gonna land up to your web application, so this guy dispatcher servlet will dispatch the request to the corresponding resource available on your web application. So it's gonna act as a receptionist in your program now. Whereas context loader listener, it's a listener which will give you the event callbacks when the context will be loaded. It's like startup and shutdown of the web application context in the Spring root. Now, what is the difference between constructor injection and setter injection? So before you come up with the constructor injection and the setter injection, you must understand what is dependency injection. So guys, let us understand this flow once again. I am having one class as employee, right? And there is one more class known as address. So employee can have the name, employee can have some salary, there will be definitely one employee ID, and employee can also have an address, right? So I'll just say an address to be as ADRS. So what we can do, we can create one constructor of an employee in this way, right? And here you can say EID goes like 101, name goes like, let's say, John, salary goes like 30,000, and address goes like some new address, right? Where address can have some address line, then you can have some city, you can have a state, and lastly we can also have some kind of a zip code. Just mentioning some parameters over here. Now what will happen, over the client part you will be writing employee assign new employee. So whenever you are creating the object of employee, this becomes the concept that the constructor of the employee will create the object of the address. We can see a significant dependency now. When you are creating the object of employee, within the constructor of employee, the object of address will be constructed. We say this concept as high dependency, or you can say we got a higher value of coupling. Now we need to reduce it, right? So you need to bring it to the lower level. So you need to take it as a low coupling. So what I will do, I will not use this technique. I will say, let us create one more constructor and pass the address as an input, right? And thereafter you can say address assign AD, or you can create a setter. You can say set address, and you can say address, and here you pass this guy. So guys, in these two approaches, rather than having a single employee object, you can now create an employee object. You can create address objects separately, right? You need not to be dependent upon the employee object, and later you can pass the address object. Or you can say employee E assign new employee and E dot set the address, and you can pass this guy A. So we want to reduce the dependency, or we want to come down with the coupling parameter. We created this logic out here. So setter injection and constructor injection are the two terminologies linked up in order to justify these two terms now, right? So let us open up our presentation once again and look on to constructor injection versus setter injection. So there is no partial injection, so setter injection can lead to partial injection. Here we need not to override the setter property, but here the constructor property, in case both the things are defined. So you can create new instance if any modification occurs. So you need not to create any instance if there is a property change. So better for too many properties, better for few properties. So guys, depends upon your choice, but constructor and setter injection, they are the two key concepts to bring down your dependency to the lower levels. Now, what is auto wiring in Spring? So many times when we are writing this dependency injection programs, you can perform these injection programs based on the names, right? For example, you can mention this auto wiring tag and you can say by name. So you need not to now write an explicit injection logic. It will be mapped automatically for you. So there are various modes through which you can have an auto wiring coming into action. So no is the default mode. It means you don't specify the auto wire. It means here nothing is enabled, so auto wiring is not enabled. So when you mention by name, it means you take the setter method and you map the data corresponding to the name By type will use the type of the attribute, and constructor will inject on the basis of the constructor. So how can we handle any exceptions in Spring MVC framework, right guys? So there can be exceptions now when you are writing the program, right? So Spring MVC framework can help us to achieve robust programming concept through these possible ways. Number one, controller based. So you can define an exception handler method in your controller class itself. You can have a global exception handler where exception handling is a cross-cutting concern through AOP, right? And then you can have a handler exception resolver. So any Spring Bean which you have declared in the dispatcher servlets application context, that can implement handler exception resolver, which can thereafter be used to intercept and process any exception which occurs in the MVC system and it is not handled by the controller part. So you can use the various different concepts out here. If you can see @exception handler annotation, so that you can specify that this view will be used to display some error. All right, so some important annotations again in the Spring framework, guys. We got @controller, @path variable, qualifier, configuration, scope, request mapping, response body, auto void, service, and aspect, right? So all these annotations, they are quite important concepts and you must have a fair knowledge on all these, right? So for example, @auto void, so either you can configure it in XML file or you can use annotations. So XML files, they come up with the inversion of control concept, whereas annotations, you need not to have XML files, you can use them directly. All right, guys. So lastly, in the Spring framework, we can also have Spring framework coming up with the database connectivity either through JDBC or through Hibernate or any other framework now, right? So Spring and Hibernate, they can work together. We have some ORM modules available within the Spring framework, and we got an API known as Hibernate template. So if you want to come up with the Spring and JDBC, you got JDBC template API, right? So guys, Spring ORM module will help us to integrate Hibernate framework into a Spring application. And Spring ORM also provides the support so that you can use Spring declarative transaction management. You can use annotations and you can perform the actions now. So now we will be on our last concept, that's like the Hibernate, which is the backend framework based on object relationship mapping, right? So guys, let us see what and all we got in the Hibernate now. So the 44th question is, what is Hibernate? Hibernate is an ORM, which is object relationship mapping. It's a framework now where you just mention your Java object and you forget about your database tables. So guys, what we're gonna do, we're gonna write down some mapping files as in XML configuration files where you will be mapping that this attribute in my object in my class will be the column name in the respective relational table. So Hibernate provides a reference implementation of the JPA, Java Persistence API, right? And it makes a great choice as an ORM tool where we got the benefits of loose coupling. Now I hope you got the meaning of loose coupling, where dependency has been reduced to the maximal level. So Hibernate configures all the flexible and can be done from the XML configurations as well as through annotations programmatically, right? So it provides us both the ways now. So what can be the benefits with the Hibernate framework? So guys, Hibernate will eliminate all the boilerplate code, whereas in the traditional approach, you need to mention and write various code snippets, and you need to write the relationship mappings, the cache management. So everything is eliminated when you use Hibernate now. So this framework will provides us XML support as in through configuration files and annotational support through JPA, that's like Java Persistence APIs. Now Hibernate provides a very powerful language, that's like HQL, which is very much inline to SQL, but You need not to learn it. It's more simpler than the SQL even. Now SQL itself is very simple language. You got more simpler language than the SQL, that's like HQL. So guys, it's an open source project from the Red Hat community, and it is used worldwide and it's very famous, especially for any large enterprise application. Your Hibernate framework is one of the ideal choices now. Now, any database vendor specific feature, Hibernate is suitable because we can also execute native SQL queries. So Hibernate is not just that we can use its native APIs and you can't do anything out of the box. You got to execute the SQL queries also with the Hibernate. One of the most significant features of the Hibernate is the cache management. So Hibernate provides 3 levels of cache through which your performance of the database operations, they're gonna get improved now. So what is the architecture of Hibernate, guys? So Hibernate of having an architecture in a very simpler fashion, guys. We got a database. On top of database, we got various modules coming in. For example, Java transaction APIs. We got Java database connectivity, and thereafter we got JNDI. That's like Java naming and directory interfaces. On top of it, we got the Hibernate APIs. So configuration API will read the XML configuration file and it will help us to create a session factory. Session factory will be used to create the session, and session is one API which maintains and creates a connection with the database. Using the transaction API, you can use the commit and rollback features, and query API will help you to create one query and retrieve the data. Criteria is one API which will help you to mention the criteria. For example, you got restrictions to manage. For example, greater than, less than, all equal to. So all these are criterias when you are trying to retrieve the data. In the Java application, you just write a Pojo class, you just write a bean, and you give this object to the Hibernate, and Hibernate's APIs, they're gonna manage everything for you. All right, we got the get method and the load method in order to perform the retrieve operation. So let's see the differences. Let's say we don't have a record available in the database. So load method will throw an exception, that's like object not found exception, whereas the get method will return a null, as in the object is not found. So guys, get method will always hit the database, whereas load method will not hit the database, right, in case it's not there. And you're gonna get a real object, not a proxy object, whereas load will return you a proxy object. So get should be used if you are not sure about the existence of instance now. So let's say that the record is existing or not, I don't know, so you use get. If you are sure about whatever you are going to extract from the database, it is existing, you can use the load method. So there are now significant differences between Hibernate and JDBC. Guys, this is one of the major query between, as in a part of interviews. So why Hibernate and why not JDBC? What are the differences? What are the advantages that you should be opting for Hibernate? Now, if you're writing a very small app, right, you need not to go on the Hibernate level. Hibernate level is required when you're writing an enterprise app, right, where you need to save the time and you don't want to do a rework, and there are various other differences. So let's have a look onto that now. So guys, first of all, you need to write a lot of code when it comes to JDBC, whereas Hibernate, you have very limited instructions to mention, right? Hibernate supports all the association, inheritance, collection mappings, where in case of JDBC API, you need to write all those logics. So one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, all these mappings, they are available as a support in the Hibernate. Hibernate will also give you the transaction management implicitly, whereas in JDBC, again, you need to manage that part. Now JDBC API, they will throw SQL exception, right? So it's a checked exception. So we need to write a lot of try-catch block code when you are using this JDBC, but Hibernate will internally manage this try-catch block for you. We got HQL, which is object-oriented programming, whereas JDBC you need to write the native SQL queries. Hibernate will automatically give you the cache management for better performance in 3 levels of cache, whereas JDBC you need to manage it yourself. So by default, Hibernate's performance is higher as compared to the JDBC part. So lastly, Hibernate will provide an option where we can create the database and the tables too, but for the JDBC, these existence should be there before you dump the data. Other than that, one of the very significant feature why Hibernate over JDBC is if you want to switch from one database to the other database, it's going to be very complicated with the JDBC. But in case of Hibernate, we got a configuration file. You just need to change the parameters in the configuration file and you will be able to shift from Oracle to MySQL or any other database to any other database of your choice. So guys, that will be all. So we just wish you all the very best, right? The team Edureka and me, Ishant. So guys, wish you all the very best. Thank you very much. So any questions, any queries and your feedbacks, they are always welcome. I hope that you enjoyed the session. And once again, all the very best for your interviews. Thank you very much, guys.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!